Hi everybody. Um, I wanted to do a video on The Last Jedi. One, because the new movie is coming out soon, within a week as of the recording of this. But also because I kind of wanted to get this off my chest. I wanted to do a whole write-up, but I felt like this format would be a little bit easier. Um, I was gonna put a little like I was gonna put a I was gonna put me down here in like a camera, but it's a little bit too late at night, so I'm gonna just leave my OC down there. Um, Basically, what this rewrite is gonna do is it needs to start and end in basically the same position. I know that a lot of people don't really like that. I don't really like how it ends, but I personally believe that the story overall is pretty good. Not in terms of what happens or how it's written. I feel like with a few extra drafts, they could have done better. Like, they could have actually turned this story into something pretty good. And I mean, like, in my pros and cons, I have some like iffy parts that I'm like kind of on the fence about, so I don't know what I'm gonna do with them. But let's just go over it. So, I've separated the movie into 5 acts with descriptions of each part of it, with Act 5 having its conclusion as well, being an extra part. So, we're going to go over the pros and the cons of each scene, and then we're going to explain some of the fixes that I would do. So, let's start off with the first scene, which is the bombing run. And just to kind of explain what happens, Poe, with a fleet of bombers, goes to destroy the Kylo Ren's like giant star destroyer that's bombarding their base, and after the bombers kind of sacrifice themselves, the movie kind of moves on. But to kind of explain what happens, let's go through it step by step. One, I kind of like how the scene actually flows. I like the plan, and I like Poe turning off Leia's communication to show that like he really needs to get this done, and he's gonna take that demotion if it means saving them. There are a few. Nope, don't want to do that. There are some few problems. One, the bomber ships are heavily inadequate. They are not designed well, and I understand what Rian Johnson was going with the World War II symbolism, but I feel he takes that a little bit too far. And the other one is the comedy around General Hux. Rian Johnson was very candid about the fact that he wanted to put him into more comedic scenes. Not entirely sure why he would want to do that, but he did. And I feel like the comedy around Hux kind of falters. So, some of the fixes that I would actually include is is basically when the bombers go in, we switch over to Rose's sister. I forget her name because they don't say it at all in the movie. And I actually like recently rewatched the film just to make sure that all of this is good and everything's in order. Some of them is going to be out of order, and I'm going to explain that. But I believe the best way to do this would be Poe basically calls in the bombers. The bombers fly towards the ship, and they basically start dropping their payloads. And it cuts back over to Poe as the Star Destroyer is being destroyed, as he doesn't look happy. Cuts back over to Leia. She's looking at the bombers, and she's not happy. And Poe feels instant regret about all this. Because we don't actually see the inside of the ships, we do not know certain aspects about them. And one, it cuts down on the amount of time, because I feel like the scene with her like following her and then like seeing her fall from the ladder and then catching the button, pressing it. It kind of takes a little bit too long to go ahead, but it and I feel like being in Poe's shoes lead into when he's talking with Finn a little bit later. Primarily, but there's also something interesting. It has to do with the next part, when Rey meets Luke, and it's very distinct of what I want to happen. Okay, so first of all, move the scene up. Rey meeting Luke should be the first scene of the movie, and it should actually start with some flashbacks back to where the initial training with Kylo, and this should be like throughout like most of the scenes with Luke, is that the scene should end off with Luke kind of being alone and then him getting a flashback of a piece of Kylo Ren's training, whether it's him trying to make a lightsaber and then it exploding because he overloaded it, which would lead into how he made his own lightsaber, or certain aspects like Luke feeling like he's reaching a little bit too into the dark side, which would build up until later. We will get to that, but pros and cons of this scene. So, I like how Luke doesn't really want Rey to be there and kind of denies them even being there. Should have also, I personally like new Luke. I feel like a few things should have been done better, primarily when it comes to him not really talking about like we don't really see his reaction to the news of Kylo Ren killing Han Solo, and I feel like that should have been the like end point of the scene, is like him basically almost like tightening into a ball and like asking him to walk out. I feel like that would have added a little bit to it. But like one of the things I really don't like about the scene is the humor. I don't like how Luke kind of feels kind of like out of it a little bit, and the way he basically just picks up the lightsaber and throws it behind his back. I feel like it's a little bit too much. And they like pack the like first act with like a lot of humor. You're gonna notice that like a lot of my problems have to be with humor, but not all of the movie is like that. So one of the things that I would actually change is how the lightsaber comes out of his hand, and it would be like he looks back to like tell Rey something, and he knocks it out of her hand, and he kind of looks at it a little bit frightened because he touched it, and then kind of moved on. And I feel like that would kind of lead up into the next few scenes of like the backstory of like showing Kylo Ren slowly go towards the dark side, and we're going to explain that a little bit. But for now, let's move on to the next act, which is Finn waking up. Now there are some good points and some bad points with this scene overall. There is a massive plot hole in which he doesn't know how they can track through the ship, track the massive dreadnought, track them through hyperspace, even though he knows where the hyperspace tracker is. It's kind of if you kind of like look into the dialogue a little bit, he's like, "Oh yeah, I used to mop that room," and he could have put like something of like, "I didn't know that was the hyperspace tracker," but I do really like how hopeless of a scenario this is with all of them. They're basically everyone on the ship basically knows they're gonna just take us over and we're gonna lose. But one of the downsides is is they clearly would have been able to catch up to them. And the explanation was, well, they're lighter and faster. I was like, no, that massive ship would have had better jets. And one of the things I would actually change, I don't think I actually put it right here, would be, actually, let me just uncover this. Okay, so, explanation of events. Finn wakes up, and he basically meets up with Poe, and Poe should actually be in his hospital room. And when he wakes up, he basically wakes and when Finn wakes up and slams his head into the thing, maybe keep that piece of humor. Poe kind of like startles awake, and then he kind of explains like, hey, you've been out for like a week and we're still running. And I was like, why are we still running? And then he kind of explains the dreadnought, and he goes, it jumped out of hyperspace and it's just been following us. We've done like 2 jumps and it keeps following us. And here's where Finn's input would come in, where he goes, I didn't know that they actually finished the tracker. Like, he heard rumors that it was a possibility, but again, he wouldn't really be on in the know when it comes to that sort of thing. And in the explanation of events, he would also basically we also get kind of told that the First Order is slowly speeding up, and I would want Hux to basically be like, nah, he humiliated us, we're going to do it slowly, and it's going to be painful for them, because it's not going to be, because this is the last of the Resistance, and he wants to enjoy this. And I feel like if they explained it like that, it would be a little bit better. Final part of Act 1 is 2 things. I kind of combined both of them together because they kind of have the same sort of flow to it. So you have Kylo Ren inside the throne room with Snoke, and Leia getting jettisoned out of the ship. Basically, I want in the scene with Kylo and Snoke to explain that it's like, how is your it was like, has your training gone well? And he's like, and he's like still holding on a little bit. One of the things, not breaking the mask. I personally feel that the mask is important, and him just taking it off would have been just as good. Like, him taking it off and like putting it into his room like next to the Darth Vader mask, and basically just like sitting there like almost like I will be like you, like sort of like almost confirming this. But on the other side, Leia. I actually enjoyed the fact that Leia has the Force. Like, a lot of people don't really like the idea, but it is led to believe in the previous movies that she does have some sort of Force connection, whether it's them actually like they can feel her with the Force and she could feel Luke back. We kind of get like a little like glimpse of it when she almost like thoughtlessly uses the Force to find Luke at the end of the 5th movie, and it's where we get kind of a hint that they're siblings in that. But the cinematography of her being jettisoned out and her basically reaching her hand back in and pulling herself towards the ship, I feel they did it really poorly. So what I would do is I would have the entire scene from Poe's point of view. It's like there's an entire like group of fighters coming in, and it's like, well, this was unexpected because Kylo Ren basically just goes out there in with several TIE fighters and just start like hammering into the shields of the support vessels, and so a bunch of the X-wings get deployed to take them on. But the real goal is them to take out the cockpit. And since we're in Poe's point of view the entire time, we go towards the X-Wing, and he's about to get into his when the explosion basically knocks him backwards. A few other explosions basically rack throughout the ship, and most of their X-Wings are gone now, probably sparing about 3 or 4, at most. And so after the explosion that takes out the command center, all the TIE fighters basically pulling back, and Poe basically runs toward it, and instead of her basically reaching out, it's almost like a bubble, almost like this massive she has a massive shield up surrounding several of the people that were in the command center. And what I would do is, instead of her basically pulling herself back in, activating the airlock, it's kind of a silly scene of she opens the door and it would jettison them all out into space. So instead of just you see her with this shield, and then we cut to her and the rest of them being pulled in, and we hear in the background no, this one's already gone, and all that sort of thing. But it's it is confirmed she at least saved 1 or 2 of them. And if that would be the case, but they're seriously injured like Leia is, that would be better. Next scene. We have okay, so this Luke's denial basically spans the entire time that he's trying to avoid talking with Rey and basically moving on. I would honestly keep a large amount of the scene. Primarily, same with Luke and R2 basically talking with each other when they do where they pull up the hologram. I would literally keep that scene verbatim. But I feel the part where he's walking and not wanting to talk to her, and then they get to the ancient Jedi text, I feel that takes a little bit too long. I think him just walking and then staring back at her and you've been following me for you've been following me for a while now, and it's well, I really want you to go. I was can you do something else? If it was just that, it would be fine. And then she goes to the text, he basically talks to her, says, fine, we'll do some training if that will tell you why I don't want to go. Also, I feel that Chewie is poorly used in this movie, and I feel a lot of other people do too. I do not know what I would do with Chewie in this movie though, because at this point Chewie is basically a glorified chauffeur. But what I would do is later on in the movie when Rey is coming back in to save them in Act 5, I would actually have Chewie be the one on the gun, and then her being the one flying, because we know that she has some flying skills for some reason. I know that Chewie is the co-pilot and all, but if Chewie was actually doing something, being the actual shooter, that would be pretty cool. Finally, I would actually have first signs of Kylo Ren's connection with her first showing up here instead of later on. It would actually be she's on the island and Luke doesn't want her around, so she looks up and she sees Kylo Ren basically walking up these stairs to the tree, and she gets really concerned because of what is he doing here? So she follows him up there and she meets the text, and it's not really explained yet. I will get to stuff with Kylo Ren in a bit, but first we gotta get through this. So after Leia gets jettisoned out, Holdo gets in, Finn and Rose then have a discussion while apparently that is going on, in which he tries to get into an escape pod and Rose stops them. And so Poe, Finn, and Rose all get together talking about how Holdo has no plan, and they set out to go to Canto Bight. Let's take this one by one. First, I actually really enjoyed Poe's just absolute frustration with Holdo. And I feel like they should have played around with it a little bit more. But the overall problem is Holdo herself. I feel like Holdo has just a lack of motivation in the scene of us not really understanding who she is and why she's so determined to not talk to Poe. And I feel like Finn missing out is detrimental to the scene. I feel like them immediately cutting to Finn and Rose being at some point of the ship, I feel like Finn and Rose would be in the meeting. Maybe not Rose, but definitely Finn. And one of the things I would change is Finn's involvement in the scene, talking to Poe, because Poe knows her, like in the at this point in the scene. Then with Finn and Rose, Rose's anger is probably the thing that I would want to hold on to. There were two things with the scene that I would keep. Rose almost, I don't want to say psychotic, but her being kind of like manic after her sister's death and being like, I got this taser. I was like, okay. And I feel like if Rose was a little bit more, I don't want to say unhinged, but a little bit more unstable as a character, it would add to her. Because through most of the movie, she is kind of just passive with a lot of the actions. And that leads into Finn's cowardice. I feel like Finn wanting to leave, I feel like doesn't really add. I feel like Finn would stay on the ship and try to figure out some way to help them. So my big change would be keeping Rose, kind of like she is in this first scene that we introduce her. She's kind of upset because her sister was gone, and she's kind of losing a few screws at the moment. Finally, we have they're making the plan. The plan overall, pretty good. I enjoy the plan. I even enjoy Maz Kanata showing up and telling him about the codebreaker. I would even add like a thing of Maz, and then looking over at Poe was like, Poe, how do you know Maz? And it's like, and then Maz going, I know a lot of flyboys. And then and then Poe basically going, but it's like, it's just the idea that she knows both Poe and Han Solo. But one of the problems is that Finn lacks motivation. He lacks some sort of motivation to go to Canto Bight with Rose. It feels weird that they would just send Finn. I know that he used to be on the ship too, but he doesn't seem too jazzed to go to the ship. So one of the things I would actually change is Poe. Poe, and this is the big change for the entire Act 3 through 5. Everything after this moment is different. Like, everything from Act 3 through 5 is substantially different because Poe goes with Finn instead of Rose. And the reason why is because, okay, and I feel like that all three of these scenes should flow to one another. Poe is with Finn in the meeting. Finn is basically kind of confused. Poe gets frustrated and talks to Holdo. Turns out that Holdo was just there on a diplomatic meeting because she is one of the last remnants of the Republic that actually had some ties with Leia that didn't get severed when a bunch of the important planets got blown up, and that she happens to be on the base. Poe did not know that she was there, and so it would give some sort of motivation of why Holdo is doing this. She's not a military strategist. She just happens to be a high-ranking person from the Republic that is just there. And she is the highest-ranking person So even though she is of a high rank, she's just not in the right mindset to be taking on this task. And I feel like that would add to later on. I'm going to talk about Holdo and Rose when it comes to it, but for right now, let's just say that most of the story is that every scene with Finn and Rose is now Finn and Poe. And when Poe was with Holdo, it's gonna be substantially different. So let's get to Act 3. We start seeing evidence of the connection between Rey and Kylo. And I would actually keep a lot of the conversation that they have, but I think the thing that really hurts it is the humor of like, what's that racket, as he like comes out and the like fish people are like freaking out. I feel like that takes from the seriousness of the scene. And I think most of the humor that like comes to it, of like Kylo not wearing a shirt, even though it is kind of funny, I feel like the humor isn't really needed. And this is talking about all the connection scenes that they have, both of them. I also don't like Kylo's confusion. I think that Kylo, when the connection comes in, Kylo goes, basically is trying to tell her something. And I think the thing that he wants to tell her is to be wary of Luke. And at this point in the flashbacks, we don't really know what he's talking about. But there is, in the probably like right before this moment, we get one of the flashbacks of, let's just say, Luke is watching over Kylo Ren build a lightsaber, and it explodes, and he goes like, oh, maybe I should have packed that. And Luke is kind of almost like stunned for a second because he swore that he saw that it was a red light that was coming from it, but that would have been impossible because he knows for a fact that he put a blue or even like white crystal in it, because there are like different shades of blue that you can put into it, and I think like either like the lighter blue to where it's almost like a white, or like one of the darker blues, but not like the like sky blue that you would see from like the original trilogy. Probably one of the darker ones from the prequels. Okay, now we're moving on to the first lesson that we have with Rey and Luke. And there is actually a lot to like, but also a lot to not like. One of the pros of this scene is that Luke basically tells her about the Force and like explains it's not just about the Jedi or Sith having it. It is a force of nature that we are letting act through us. And I feel like that aspect of the religious philosophy should be actually shown more. But I think the overall problem with the scene is that the setting is unimpressive. The CGI of like the big room isn't too interesting. And one of the things I would actually change is I would move her training with the lightsaber here. Basically, what would happen is that the scene would basically play out almost exactly the same, and then Luke would storm off. And Rey is basically now sitting in the middle, and instead of like the large fountain that's there, it's almost like a platform surrounded by water, that the water is basically like rising and like swirling around and then going out through channels, almost like it's like some sort of like odd geyser. And on the walls, and you see this the first time that she like walks in, like let's just say in the scene, that there are a bunch of like depictions of Jedi doing doing lightsaber techniques and like stances and moves. And so she basically traces them along with like her eyes as she starts mimicking the movements. And I feel like that would be like a little bit better of a way to like demonstrate how she learns how to use it. because her standing in that spot, being like connected to the Force, and like you could even see like the water start to like bubble up around her as she's like focusing more as she's learning, and probably like Luke like looks off into the distance but is kind of still kind of shaken after what he saw. And I feel like if you were to do something like that, it would work fundamentally better than just she stands by a rock and she switches to her lightsaber, cuts it off, and like almost crushes the frog people again. Which again, I don't really think that that type of humor is that interesting. But yeah. Next scene, and probably the most controversial, Canto Bight. Now, I actually like the setting a lot. And I heard a lot of people go like, oh, it's a weird casino planet. But I actually like this setting. I feel like they could do a lot with this. And now that Poe's with them, we get into the most important part. They don't go in with any sort of disguise. They go in with their uniforms and they basically look around, and Rose has this sort of like heart to heart moment of like oh, these animals are being hurt and these children are being enslaved, and all the people here are like rich off the war. I would just remove all of that and just turn this scene almost into like, I don't want to say like James Bond, but almost like, I was like back when they're like flying off like Poe and Finn. Poe basically goes in and walks out in like a really nice suit, and Finn's like, "What are you wearing that for?" And he's like, "I was like, oh, you'll see." And then we basically, when we come back to it, Poe and Finn are in really nice suits, and they walk into the casino looking like they own the place, and like, okay, let's do this. As they track down the guy, I would basically, I would have Poe have a lot of knowledge of the planet and basically casually kind of explain why they're there. I would even have like them mention, or maybe a cameo by Lando. I probably wouldn't have like an extended scene of them meeting him. Probably what happens is they find the guy that has the brooch, and they approach him and they start asking him questions, and he's like really confused, and so they take him away because, sorry about my microphone, and they get taken away, and then Lando might come in and like, what was that? I was like, I don't know, they were asking about the brooch, and I was like, well, what about the brooch? And he's like, no, I got it last week, and I got it earlier today. Doesn't it look nice? And then Lando go like, sure, okay. And like maybe like a scene like that, and it would lead into something that's coming up later. So next scene, the second lesson that they have, which is Luke basically telling her about, and it was like, in my view, the Jedi are evil, like that sort of thing, but it's like, it's more of going from his previous lesson of, because the Force is for both the Jedi and the Sith, the Jedi trying to take so much power was detrimental to the Force as a whole, and the Jedi Council were a bunch of like jerks that basically sat in the room and didn't really do anything, and allowed a bunch of things to happen. They ignored a lot of things on Coruscant, and they just let things go about because they thought that they were always in the right. And I feel like this lesson wasn't too bad. I actually felt like I feel like it could have worked. It was probably a little bit more like, probably a little bit like differently worded. It could have worked. But one of the things that we do get here is we see the scene of Kylo Ren defending himself against Luke, but it's told from the perspective of, no, I didn't do anything. I would change that. I would actually change it to Luke telling the truth right there and now. At this moment, we would see the entire scene of him pulling out his lightsaber, realizing it, and then Ben turning into Kylo Ren, then going out, and then Rey basically looking confused, and then he would say, "This is what the Force told me to do, and I rejected it, and it has scarred me forever because I lost all my students, I lost all that." And I would make it a point that Luke feels like it wasn't his fault, truly. That something about Kylo was telling the Force to make him do that, and he wasn't sure what is up with that. I would actually make it so that at this point, Rey kind of comes to the conclusion at the same time that Luke basically does as they're talking, that that the entire reason why Luke is doing this is because how's a good way to describe it? That Snoke was clouding his mind. Like, from a far off distance, he was clouding his judgment and was making him see things that wasn't really there. And this would lead into a scene later, and we'll get to that then. Okay, so now, while they're in the prison, you have Poe and Finn now in their... I would keep them in their nicer outfits, but probably more like partially taken off so they're not as stuffy. And they meet DJ. I really like DJ as a character. I feel like his involvement in the story really fit. But here's where what I talked about came in before. I would actually have DJ be the real codebreaker. It is hypothesized that DJ actually was the codebreaker that they were talking about the whole time, and he got the brooch taken from him in something. I would make that a lot more apparent of almost like him basically confessing, like, yeah, he basically took all my stuff and now I'm here. But that's for another time. Like, one of the big cons about this scene is the comedy with BB-8, with him having all the coins inside of him and using it. I feel like that doesn't work, and I feel like the big horse chase through the town, while visually impressive, makes little sense because they're causing a lot of problems, and these rich people are going to have some sort of insurance. This is just known. And the things that I would change is the method of escape. I would actually have it so that they almost fight their way out, and they basically carve a path and they try to get to the ship. The ship explodes. They try to make their way to the cliffside, and then have probably a distraction from BB-8. I'm not entirely sure what I would do there. I would probably have BB-8 do something. Even if it gets like him using all the coins that's inside of him for something, I would still have BB-8 like distract them as DJ shows up at the ship. And I feel like that would be a little bit better than them grabbing a bunch of horses and causing a lot of damage. I would almost make it like a Western shootout almost, where it's like you can tell that there are some that the security guards on this rich planet is packing a lot of heat and is just two guys, and so they're faring well but not enough. It would also be a good time to show off Poe and Finn's gun shooting, because we know that Finn is a stormtrooper and we know that Poe is a really good shot. with his blaster, or at least we get some information about that from the previous movie. Either way, I would actually have them show off some gun skills, because we get a lot of lightsaber stuff, but we don't get a lot of gun stuff. And I would, or blaster. I've been saying gun, but it's blaster. I would have that be in the scene. Next scene. The dark mirror in which Rey goes into the hole in the ground, and she goes up to the mirror and she talks to to learn more about her parents. I would keep that entire scene. Like, I don't actually have, just to share, I don't actually have any cons for this scene. And the whole reason for that is I really liked that. I really liked how they depicted it. The only, like, difference would probably have some more dark side presence. Like, maybe when she touches the mirror, like something like starts growing on her hand, almost like a fungus, and it's almost like it's trying to pull her into the mirror almost. I just want more of like a visual demonstration that there is some sort of like dark side presence there, almost like how the dark vines were in almost kind of like when Luke walked into that spot in the fifth movie, but probably like a little bit more apparent. Okay, so after this scene, she meets up with Kylo, and Kylo would basically tell his side of the story. And instead, I would feel like it's right after she gets out, Kylo basically comes to her and basically says, "Look, okay, how about I talk about the pros and cons first?" I really like Rey and Kylo talking. I feel like that's pretty cool. And I like the fact that Yoda shows up. Now, I don't like the explanation of the lightning. And to an extent, a lot of everything that Yoda does. But another con is Luke's overall cowardice in that sort of scene where he's like, please don't. I was like, almost like he doesn't like want anything. I would actually go full on, and I would do a full battle where he pulls his lightsaber out and she pulls the lightsaber out, and they have a few taps of the lightsaber before Luke kind of like closes it off of like, no, I'm not doing this, and like I was like sending her off. And it's mostly because Rey and Kylo Ren talk about what she wanted from that scene, and this would be the scene in which he basically says, I know who your parents are. They're not really anything. You do not need to worry about that. And her response to that is, why does everyone tell me not to worry about my parents? That makes me want to know about them more. And stuff like that. And I would feel like that sort of like, if we move the parent scene up from the middle of Act 5 to Act 4, it would be a little bit more interesting with that sort of like talking. Let's talk about the Yoda lightning, because there are conflicting stories both before and after the movie. Okay, so Yoda in the scene closes his eyes and lightning hits the tree, and then he starts laughing. And he then walks up as like Luke is kind of stunned and basically hits him with his cane, and he goes like, ow. And it is believed that Yoda brought down the lightning to hit the tree. I would actually change that. So yeah, I would fully change that scene. So when the lightning comes down, Yoda's slightly surprised and then starts laughing. Basically iterating like, it's like, well, I guess that solves all of our problems then. And he's like, but the Jedi text, and he's like, well, it doesn't matter. I like basically go like that. Of like, I would prefer it if because the storm is raging on outside, it is logical that lightning would hit a tree that is on top of a hill on an island surrounded by water. It is one of the highest points of that sort of like island. And so it hitting the tree makes a lot of sense. Now why it wouldn't have hit the tree like sooner, I don't know. But hey, let's just say that the lightning hits the tree because of natural causes, and then Yoda goes, oh, okay then. But one of the big things, after their battle, Luke reconciles with her, basically going, he doesn't really say you go on ahead. It's more like, I still have things I need to do on this place. And her response is, then you'll come to us. And he goes, maybe, basically iterating to her like, Leia's life signs are weak, and so I don't know how long she has, and so you should probably hurry up. And basically him confirming to her. Then the scene with Yoda happens, all that, and then the scene basically closes out with him looking over the cliffside with Yoda, and like basically thinking about it as he looks down as he sees his X-wing, as he basically sits there and goes, no, there is something I can do. Immediately goes into this scene with what would normally be Finn, Rose, and DJ. I really like the conversation that Finn and DJ have where they talk about the fact that the people on that casino planet gave to both sides. And because Poe is there, him and DJ have kind of like a verbal spat with each other, talking about how it's like, it's like, of course they're gonna do it. The First Order came up and they're demanding, and they probably paid better. And it's like, how could the First Order pay better? How could the First Order pay better if they just showed up and we don't know where they came from? And they would basically have a back and forth like that, and I feel like that would probably be a little bit better. One of the biggest downsides of the scene, well, out of the entire like third and fourth acts, is Rose. And how about we go back over to what Rose is doing? Because in the story we kept getting like little glimpses of Poe talking with Holdo, trying to be like, no, we need to do something. Please tell us you at least have a plan. In this, we see Holdo do stuff, and Rose is starting to panic and like telling him like, hey, you guys need to hurry up because Holdo just sacrificed all of our support ships, and we brought on their crew and some of their equipment, but not all of it. And we lost some pretty good people over there. What should we do? And at this point, Poe basically goes, I don't know, think of something. And one of the things that is kind of on the fence is DJ finds out their plan that they're trying to get into Snoke's ship, disable the light speed tracker, and then go. And I feel like I'm kind of on the fence of like how exactly they would tell him that sort of plan, because he's gonna find out eventually that they're going onto a First Order ship. But I feel like the best way to do it is we will pay you whatever we need to. And he goes, Republic has no money. It's like, what exactly do you want me to do? And it's like, I was like, well, you can keep the ship. And he's like, I guess so. As he's like, since he's like rummaging through all of it, like getting all the like chips and stuff. But it's like, okay, if the ship that I stole is the payment for me, I guess. Like almost like kind of like flippantly like, okay, what else are you gonna do? Which leads into him betraying them later. Oh wait, no. actually made that bold. So yeah, I would actually have like DJ's like whole like motivation like kind of revealed that he doesn't really like either party and he would prefer living in the gray almost between like and almost like kind of indicating like I don't care about what the politics between you two groups are. I just want to get paid for my services. And they're like, okay, we'll pay you. And that leads into Act 5. So we're going to talk about each part individually. So first off, the Finn side. They sneak in and they get caught by an evil BB-8 and they get brought by Phasma to be executed. And after the light speed after Holdo rams the ship at light speed, they start to have a battle. And I don't know how exactly how I would reconcile that half part, but the first half is pretty good. Like DJ brings them in, opens it up. It's actually an ambush because they knew that they were coming because of the evil BB-8, and then they get captured. I don't know how I'd fix the second half. I didn't really get to that part in my writing, but I think it would probably go something close to the deleted scene in which they kind of make her look bad in front of her own troops, and they solidly take her out. I would probably even leave in the piece where like BB-8 like controls the ATST. But one of the big changes is it's less of a one-sided struggle because Rose is held down so much. I would honestly have it be like, okay, so in the second half, let's just say this. Instead, or yeah, not really less. How about more? More of a one-sided struggle. So, let's just talk about. Let's just visualize it like this. They get to it. DJ is like DJ's basically there and he's like, maybe I'm in over my head a little bit. And then all three of them basically try to make their way out. They walk backwards almost to the escape vessels and tries to make their way out. But as they're going through it, DJ kind of betrays them and they just barely get out. If it would be sort of like that in which but they still take out Phasma in an interesting way, maybe that. I don't know. I feel like if they were more on a defensive foot for the entire battle, I feel like it would be a little bit more gripping because, again, this scene is meshed with the next scene, them basically like interweaving the two moments in with each other. I don't know exactly what I would do here. I would have to put a little bit more thought into it, but that's just one alternative that I could do, or at least think of. Okay. So when it comes to the throne room, I really like the stuff with Rey and Kylo Ren at the end. I don't really like the kill it if you have to kind of part where it's like, I know that that's earlier, but like, let the past die, come with me, we're gonna kill both sides off, and then we'll rule in an area of gray. And I feel like that aspect should be brought into light a lot more. Everyone's telling Rey there needs to be a gray. Everything needs to come back to gray. We need to dissolve both sides into each other for that. But in this sort of scene, like Rey kind of being told this by both her mentor and Kylo, which seems like that they're trying to do some sort of budding relationship. I don't see it, but who knows? Maybe they might they might make it work. Who knows? But one of the things I am on the fence about is Snoke. I feel like Snoke should have more dialogue, talking about he needs to make Kylo ready for his next stage. And Kylo basically saying, I don't understand what the next stage even is. Stuff like that. And if they kind of lead into what they might be doing in the next movie, which is, and this is all like a theory on my part since I haven't looked too much into the spoilers, but the Emperor is coming back, and at this point he would be super ancient, and he would have survived the Death Star blowing up and being atomized in the down that shaft. But hey, let's just say he is basically a corpse on strings, basically being kept alive by his own force energy, and he's basically puppeting it like it's some weird like voodoo trick. Let's just say that. And maybe he wants to use Kylo as some sort of like body surrogate, and Snoke is trying to get him ready to become that surrogate. Who knows? But one of the things I would change, better fight, and probably more of a great conclusion. Rey doesn't want it, Kylo does, and it goes against what Snoke wanted, which was him to be fully dark side. And I would have Kylo taking out Snoke, being his direction of, I want the Force Order to be more gray. And this could lead into the next movie, because we know from several clips that were in trailers that Rey and Kylo are working together for some of it. So I would actually expect Kylo to kind of come back and not really redeem himself, but be more of, I don't think the dark side should hold power over people. Just like I don't think that the Jedi should have power over people. And Rey is like, no, there is still good in the world. We should observe the light side. If they go into that direction, I would be fine with it, honestly. Finally, we have the escape to the Salt Planet. I completely forget his name. One of the distinct things about this scene is Poe basically stages a mutiny because it doesn't look like Holdo knows what she's doing. She's just putting them all in transports, and then they're going to just send out. They're loading it full of equipment, and they're going to just head out. And so he mutinies, and then Leia wakes back up, takes him out, and they basically fly off. And when the First Order find out about it, they start firing upon them, which causes Holdo, who is still in the pilot's chair, to basically go into go to light speed and basically ram the dreadnought and basically rip it apart. Some of the cons of this, some of the pros of the scene, is, wait, I think I actually had those reversed. 1 second as I actually double check. Yeah, I would prefer if Rose was in the scene, basically taking Poe's place. Her staging a mutiny would make a little bit more sense, because I think both of these are just the potential of what the scene could be, the way I wrote it. So imagine this: Rose, with a bunch of the engineering parts, basically stage a mutiny to try to take over the ship, because they don't know what's going on. They haven't been told, because they're just the engineers. They're going to be put onto the transports and basically sent off, and that's all they know. And this could be a really great scene where Rose is basically wrestling the controls away from Holdo, and Holdo, as the movie is going on, is getting more frayed and frazzled and more like disheveled. Like she comes in right here as this sort of like clean, very clean working looking. She's got the gown on. She has the little like halo in her hair, and she like has like a very like soft voice, but like by the time that she's wrestling the controls away from Rose, like she looks like an absolute mess because she's just falling apart both physically and she's falling apart mentally. And the thing to make her like stop and explain everything would be Leia showing up to basically tell them both off. Of like, we need to follow the plan. And Holdo basically kind of like composes herself and like thinks on it, and she sits down in the chair and she has a breathe in and very exhausted exhale. And I feel like that if they were to do something like that, it could have made all the stuff with Poe and Holdo make a lot more sense. Her just being so underprepared for this and doing all that, it could work. But one of the things I would fix, I would keep in the light speed jump, but I would change. Well, that's embarrassing. Some of the details. Primarily, what happens is they pull on the transports. They go towards the ship. Holdo immediately starts revving up the ship, and they're all basically kind of looking on like, what is she doing? And I was like, this is unexpected, because they don't know that the transports are going off yet. If I were to going back to how I changed the second half, while all that's going on, she's revving up the ship, basically turning it back towards, and they're like, no. It was like, she wouldn't, like, one of the things that she says is she doesn't have, it was like, the ship isn't big enough for that. And they basically kind of allude to the fact that when you go to light speed, it's not really they're moving at light speed, it's they're warping from one area to another by basically condensing their space to move forward. Is why everything kind of like pulls inwards and then shoots forward. Basically, I would make it in lore that to do the light speed trick that she does, she needs a heavier mass, and the bigger the ship, the more damage it would do. But why would you build such a big ship for one hit? Something like the Dreadnought would be able to do it, but it probably like they could even like explain this like in lore that type of ship probably would be able to take out maybe the Death Star, but it wouldn't be able to take out a hard planet with like a solid core in it. Like something like that. Like you could really see how it's like, okay, so it cuts to the inside of the ship, and we see that a lot of the equipment and even full parts of the support ships are now loaded into the Raddus, giving it much more weight, giving it more mass, that when it actually does the hyperspeed jump, it's very risky, and they basically just start firing onto the ship. So she moves all of the shields to the front of the ship as it starts getting ripped apart, and then she goes into the jump right next to it, and it causes all the damage. And I feel like they could explain it. there are some ways to explain the hyperspace, the light space jump. I keep saying hyperspace, whatever. Okay. There are some ways that they could talk about it. It could be just a matter of the Radish just happen to have the right amount of mass. Like they pulling all of the destroyed support ships into its previously destroyed loading bay that would have nothing else inside of it might work. She basically cordons off like certain parts of the ship with like no other people, and they could talk about it as like, hey engineers, we're moving you out of engineering. It's like, why is that? It's like, because we have to make room for stuff. And it just sounds like complete nonsense. They could explain it. It could work. The problem is they didn't explain it too well, and in the next movie they're going to have to try to explain away certain things, like how exactly do they not have a tracker in another ship? How exactly do people not use the light speed jumps? Either way, moving on. Oh yeah, holding the line. I really do not like the scene. Okay, so to explain the scene, they hold down inside of it. They then prepare everything to resemble Hoth, almost down to the fact that they have a bunch of ground troops in a trench out in front, and then they take speeders to take on the updated AT-ATs. I don't like it. I don't like anything about the scene. I feel like they could have rewritten a lot of it. Primarily, the idea that the Death Star tech battering ram probably is more like a charged shot, in which it's gonna eventually make a hole, and I would basically rewrite the scene. So imagine this: they get inside. Poe and Finn basically land inside as well. Poe basically makes he basically threads the needle right under and then lands. And then they basically step out like, okay, we're here. Stuff like that. And then the real scene happens, in which they're trying to connect to the outside. No one's really giving them information. And then Luke shows up. Luke basically shows up and he does the same sort of scene, gives her the dice. Let's just say the entire scene is still the same. And once they basically bore a hole into the door, Luke basically walks out. Exact same scene. And when they shoot him constantly, and then he tells them to stop firing, and the dust basically settles, there is just basically a red glow. And they're all just sitting there just looking at him, as he's just holding every single one of the shots that were shot at them just in midair. As they're all just sitting there like, whoa, what exactly is he doing? As he then directs all of those beams, all of those shots, to destroy the battering ram and the legs of all of the AT-ATs. Not shooting their cockpits to immediately make them blow up. Just take out their legs. So now they can't move and they're horribly damaged. And maybe also redirecting one of the shots to shoot part of Kylo Ren's ship, and just have the scene basically play out normally from there. I really like the scene with Luke and Leia, and I really like the battle with Luke and Kylo. Some of the poor points of the scene is Luke's final note to him, and his then death, in which it turns out that he wasn't actually there. he was actually just a astral projection while he was still on the planet, because they wanted to give Luke a dual sunset for him to go out on. I feel like they should have waited until the next movie to give him that sort of send off. And I think they might actually be doing that sort of thing. Like one of the spoiler leaks that I saw was like they go back to Tatooine to the old ruins of the farm that are for some reason still there and not repurposed for whatever reason, because could have repurposed it into a different moisture farm, who knows. And they bury their lightsabers and they basically go like and they look off as the sunset starts to happen, and they have the moment of like, this series started of like they wanted it to basically end where it began, everything basically settling. Sure, maybe, okay, but I feel like they shouldn't have done it in the second movie. This feels a little bit too soon to have a final note. So instead, one of the things I would actually fix, Luke's lightsaber being green. Because he's actually there physically, he can't use the blue lightsaber that got destroyed when Rey made her escape. Oh, I forgot to talk about that. On the escape to, on the escape to the Salt Planet, I really don't like how Rey escapes, and I really don't like how Kylo Ren and Hux have this, like, I'm the leader now, and then Hux goes like, well, you gotta be the leader, and then Kylo basically chokes him and goes, okay, you're the leader. I feel like Hux should be like, okay, so what do we do now? Almost kind of like, instead of like, okay, don't make this guy upset, just lead this guy on. I'll still be the military strategist, and he will still be the main leader. We'll just co-lead. Basically, like, kind of like putting that off the pasture. But when the lightsaber breaks, we know that Luke would not have his blue one. Kylo Ren should have realized that something was off when he had a blue lightsaber. But for him to pull out the green lightsaber, Kylo Ren looking at it and going like, you used is like, you didn't strike me down with that lightsaber before, what do you make was like, are you here to finish the job? And he's like, no, Kylo, I want you to know something. And like they sort of like have a dynamic finish, and he like does like all of the like wording again as like as before, but he also basically says something to the effect of killing me will solve nothing. Do you really want to go through with it after you've already killed your father? And he goes, okay, it will help. And they kind of have a good finishing note, and then Luke basically goes, okay then, as Kylo basically takes him out. But Luke disappears at the last second. Like, his robe and his lightsaber basically fall to the ground, and Kylo's basically looking, they're like, what, where'd he go? It's like, and he's like, picks up the lightsaber and is like holding onto it, like, where'd he go? And like almost make it be like, kind of like how Obi-Wan basically disappeared with the final hit from Darth Vader. It's almost like the second before he died, he went into the Force, and he became one with the Force, and he left all of his stuff there. I feel like that would have been a cooler note, almost because it's almost synonymous as that meaning. And then Luke as a Force ghost basically shows up behind him like, and now that you've struck me down, you're gonna have to live with that. I hope you're gonna be okay with that. And basically kind of vanishes besides him, and has Kylo's basically kind of shaken with this. He's visibly shaken by this. The end could be kind of the same, like slave kid being inspired by the stories that they told of like how much of that's true, and it's like I was like, I don't know, like almost kind of like talking about this almost like if it's been several years since this has actually happened. Like, who knows? Like, same kind of finishing note. Like that whole final scene of like, oh, Poe and Rey finally meet each other. But like, one of the whole things that I wanted to talk about with all this is I feel tiny little changes here and there really would make the story feel better. Like, you're at the end of the day, Luke is still going to be really sour, but he ends a lot better. I feel like keeping Kylo Ren closer to trying to be a neutralizing force than just fully going over to the dark side would fit a little bit better with his character. And I feel like Poe being more intrinsic into Finn's story adds to the chemistry that they already had in the previous movie. And I know that some people go like, I didn't really remember Poe that much. And I'm like, but Poe was still one of my favorite characters of that movie. And most of this rewrite is basically giving Poe more things to do to basically show him off. Mostly because I kind of like the actor, I kind of like the character, and I really wish that they actually showed more. Does this fully fix the story? I personally think it does. And I think that when taking all this into account, it could make the story work. Again, this is just a very rough draft that I kind of wrote some of the details like months ago, some of them weeks, days, to some of it being an hour ago. But the fact that I could come up with this, and Rian Johnson had had a very long time to come up with his, I don't know what that says. Anyway, tell me your thoughts about this incredibly long video in which I just basically point at my screen. I don't really have too much going on, no like fancy music or anything. I just wanted to put my thoughts out there. I guess let me know in the comments what you thought. Show me how much you liked or disliked my rewrite by like voting with the likes down there, and just do whatever. Tune into my more regular content or my podcast whenever they show back up. Who knows? I guess I'll see you guys in another time. Goodbye.